go live to right now. We've got Nick Phillips with us, Applied Digital. Nick, are you with us?
I am. How are you doing today?
Very good. Good morning. Thanks for joining us. We've got the technology working, so I guess we know it's all working well. Thank you. Appreciate it.
No, thanks for having me on.
You bet. So you are with Applied Digital, and I thought maybe I'll do a quick touch on what we'll talk about, but you could tell us a little bit about yourself and the company. In topical news of the area, there are some discussions of a potential data center is kind of the term being put in Dual County. There's discussions in the Sioux Falls area. You see some, I think you're dealing with, and that's been completed in Ellendale, North Dakota. Nick, tell us a little bit about yourself and Applied Digital as a company there.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Nick Phillips. I'm the EVP of External Affairs for Applied Digital. So I work with local, state, and federal government issues that can come up from time to time. My group also does land acquisition as well as works with the community on the various things that we do. So on a day-to-day basis, in the beginning, it's a lot of education. As we get further along, it might be some coordinating on different topics that could come up. And then we also get to do the fun stuff of, donations and working with nonprofits and locals on various projects around the area.
And so when they throw out the term data center, let's maybe clarify a little bit what when you say data center, what does that kind of mean when you break it down?
Yeah, so there's a lot of things being thrown around about what is a data center or what is not a data center, and frankly, there's really three different types of data centers out there. There's traditional data centers, which you'll typically see in traditional markets like Northern Virginia, Phoenix, Dallas, places like that, and they're hosting things that are on the internet. So it could be your online banking, it might be websites, Netflix, Hulu, all the stuff that we do. Of course, we're on, through the computer right now, and that's all using a data center. So those are kind of the traditional types of uses. Then there's blockchain facilities. So people have heard about Bitcoin mining. There's some of those floating around in rural areas. I've built some large ones, in my past there. And then there's AI factories, which is what we build. And the AI factories are a little bit different. They're typically bigger. They have much larger employment numbers than either of the other two types. And for us, they're liquid cooled. But the way that liquid cooling works in northern climates is it is pretty cold out. Normally, if you were to invite a business to come, relocate to your area, you wouldn't start with, hey, it's cold and windy out. But for us, it's cold and windy out. And that helps a lot operationally to be able to cool the machines without having to consume water. And it also saves a lot of money on electricity. But basically, data centers are just big buildings. The buildings have computers in them. They can be general purpose, like I started with, for traditional, where they're online banking, websites, your news, video teleconferencing, all that kind of stuff. They could be specialized like blockchain, or they can be specialized like what we do, which is AI factories. And then our role in the business is we build these buildings. We design them, we build them, we operate the building itself, its infrastructure, and then we're a landlord. So we lease space within the building to a hyperscaler. So it's a big, think of all the big tech companies you might know out there. Some of them could be our potential customer. And so they take care of the computers, but we take care of the electrical systems, the mechanical systems, the diesel backup generators, if we have those, or they could be natural gas. There's different kinds of backup systems, and we take care of all of the building and its infrastructure.
You touched a little bit there, Nick, on the liquid cooled. I have been doing some research as this has kind of become topical in our area. And as anybody knows, if you're looking at anything online, shoes, whatever, you start to get served different ads and now news stories too. But I've come across some where they use an exorbitant amount of water, or they're pumping, I don't know if it's polluted water necessarily, but they're pumping water back in, out, and things like that. But you mentioned, is it like a loop system or something then with that liquid cooled, or?
Yeah, so for us, it's a closed loop. So if you think about the way that your car works, assuming it's a combustion engine, not an electric car, but a combustion engine, there's coolant that you put in the radiator when they first make the car. It gets pumped, through the engine. It takes some of that heat through the liquid. It goes back to the front of the car into the radiator, and then air blows across it as you drive down the road, and so that helps get the heat out of the engine and keeps the engine running well. And then from time to time you might put a little extra coolant in there, but it's not every time you fill up gas or something. It's typically very infrequent. And then of course your coolant stays in that car in that closed loop system for a very long time. So what we build is very similar to that. So what we have is a closed loop system. It's a little more advanced, right? So just like your engine in your car would heat up that fluid, the computers heat up the fluid that comes out. It comes out of the building. It goes through radiators. Those radiators can just be, they're dry radiators, but they can either have the fans on or have the fans off. If it's a hot day, you want to blow air across it, versus if it's a cold day, you don't need to blow air across it, because it's just, sometimes it gets cold in South Dakota. And so when it's cold, you don't need that. And then it comes back into the building. And if the temperature is cool enough, it just goes back through the computers and it just goes through a circle. And that's all that it's doing. If it's a very hot day out, then maybe we run chillers, which use electricity to cool the water down further. But we consume zero water for the cooling itself, none whatsoever. The things that we consume water in the building are going to be hand washing, kitchens, bathrooms, things like that. It's a very low amount of water consumption. You can think of it like a household for a single building. Depending on what we do outside, we might choose to do, plants, trees, make the area beautiful, right? It's nicer than just having a big gray box, and we'll do irrigation out there. But what we like to do with the irrigation is we catch rainwater. So outside you'll see ponds. And those ponds are there because, these are big buildings. The building itself is 907,000 square feet. So it's a pretty big footprint, 20 acres, for a building. Plus there's parking lots and a substation and other things out there that water can't soak into the ground. So you have a choice. You can either just let that water run off and flood all your neighbors. But as you know, in the Midwest, whiskey's for drinking and water's for fighting.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't do that. What we do instead is we have retention ponds, and we catch that water. We can use it for irrigation for ourselves. In Ellendale, we can make it available to the volunteer fire department if farmers want to come take it for chemical water for their fields, or irrigation to dry out. We do that, and then it could also go back into the creek or water system that it would have normally gone into anyway eventually. But what we do is we slow that down. And so we consume, again, zero water for the cooling of the computers, none whatsoever. Do some people consume water around the country for data centers for cooling? Absolutely. In areas where there's water, you can use water and you can evaporate it. And that evaporated water can reduce electrical consumption. But because it's so cold in South Dakota, we don't need to do that. And also it's fairly arid. There's not just an abundance of extra water to just evaporate. The ones that do evaporate water, I've never heard of an actual situation where anybody's putting anything other than water back into there that's just, your normal water that would come out of a building. There's no chemicals going into the water. That's not legal. That's not something that's allowable. Some facilities might have treatment plants because they need to clean it and put it in, but it's certainly not poisonous water going back into these systems. And again, for us, our two facilities in North Dakota, 3 facilities in North Dakota are all on rural water. So we have very low amounts of water available to us from the water authorities there. And so we don't have much to use.
Well, could we maybe talk too then on that note a little bit about power consumption? I know that, with something like what you hear also is the power consumption, would it affect people's rates, or is that a negative impact also on the communities that you enter into? Or since now we know that there's different data centers, this specific kind of data center?
Yeah, so there was actually a really interesting study by Berkeley National Labs. You can go out there. It's like a 30, 40-page document. They they set out to answer the question: are data centers the reason why power rates have gone up around the country? Right. So that's a fair question. You see, if you believe everything you read on the internet, data centers use lots of water. I talked about how we don't, and your power rates are definitely going up, and all these things. But that's not the reality. Have there been cases where there have been problems due to somebody that's a large user, whether it's a data center or an ethanol plant or some big power user consuming power and causing challenges? Sure, I'm sure there have been, but our industry is very good about this. And the study went out and said that no, in fact, rates are not going up due to data centers. So what causes rates to go up? It's a little complex, but it's actually also kind of simple to understand if you really sit down and think about it. So a very large percentage of the cost of your power bill are the fixed costs associated with maintaining the grid, right? So that means if a wire falls down, you got to replace it. If a breaker has issues, they have to replace that piece of equipment. If you have a challenge at your house because a tree fell over or there's an ice storm or whatever, there's just maintenance that goes into keeping the grid working all the time. Easy concept for everybody to understand. The other thing that people miss, though, is the cost of everything has gone up. Steel costs more, copper costs more, fuel recently is costing less, which is nice. But there's costs of everything across the board. Us as consumers, we're paying more all over the place. And so the utilities also have to pay more. So for utilities that have the same amount of power consumption, it's just flat. Nothing's changed. It hasn't gone up, it hasn't gone down. If the number of people using electricity isn't changed, but the costs for taking care of everything has gone up, naturally what happens to the price of power? It has to go up. There's no choice. But in states where the amount of electricity has gone up, sometimes because of data centers, sometimes because of just population growth or whatever, if the costs of things have gone up, but the rate of growth has gone up faster than the cost of things, rates can actually come down. And so if you look at North Dakota, which is where we have 100% of our data centers that we've built operating today, from 2019 to 2025, so over 6 years, the state is consuming 40% more electricity in the state now than it was before, right? So 2019 versus 2025. In that same period of time, rates have gone down. So commercial rates have gone down 3 cents per kilowatt hour in North Dakota, and residential rates have gone down 1 cent per kilowatt hour. Both of those represent a pretty big percentage of the average rates in the state, but it's because electricity consumption has gone up that those have gone down. In Ellendale, which is our largest facility, and I can talk numbers about that, what's the consumption look like, but in Ellendale, we're in a location where there's a very large amount of wind. Dual County, also where we've proposed to go, has a lot of wind in that area. And so what attracted us to Ellendale is that there's about 2,000 megawatts of wind generated within 100 miles of the area. Some of it's in North Dakota, some of it's in South Dakota. And that wind all concentrates to the substation right next to us. And the transmission lines that take energy out of that substation are too small. They're not big enough for the amount of wind that's there. So with power, if you make energy, but you can't send it somewhere, it doesn't work. It's just like water. You can only stuff so much water into a pipe before the pipe is full. Electricity works very similar to water in some ways. And so when the transmission lines aren't big enough, what they do is they have brakes, like on your car kind of, on those windmills, and they stop them from spinning. So they don't produce energy. And if they're not producing energy, but they're there, that's a missed opportunity. And in our case in Ellendale, we are able to now use electricity that otherwise wouldn't be produced because that transmission line's not big enough. And so because we're using more electricity, that means those windmills turn more, which means they produce more revenue, which means that there's more cost reimbursements to the grid, et cetera, from the transmission system. And so we've caused $31 million in rate decreases since we've been operating in Ellendale over the last few years here. And so $1 million of that, those dollars, there's $1 million in South Dakota for MDU's customers, and there's $31 million in North Dakota for MDU's customers. And by the way, there's public filings about this out there, presentations to the PSC This is not just Nick, saying things. Like you can go look into this. But that's a huge value add. And there's a lot of rumor that there's a transmission line being built from Ellendale to Jamestown. There's a rumor that that's just for us. That's a reliability issue. Will it help us? Yeah, because we're a consumer. Like, more reliability is good for us. But that was originally planned before we were even a business. We started business in 2021. I was the 5th person to join. And that transmission line, JetX, I think they've been talking about that for 8, 9, 10 years, something like that. It's been a long time. And so for us, we're actually producing a huge amount of benefit to consumers. Doesn't mean that rates are definitely going down for everybody just because a data center pops up. But what I do know is there's 3 entities that care a whole lot about the rates. It's and reliability, right? So there's the Regional Transmission Organization, RTO. So in the case of Ellendale, that's MISO. In the case of Dual County, it's also MISO. They're responsible for making sure that the grid is reliable. You're not having brownouts. You're not having challenges where power's unavailable. They work on transmission line planning and generation planning and things like that. So very important to them that it's highly reliable. The utilities also have that. Depending on the utility, there's co-ops, which are owned by the consumers, right? That's one type of owner. And then there's investor-owned. But companies who've been serving consumers for 100 years, they don't want to just do things, to harm them. And then there's a state regulator. So in South Dakota, it's the PUC. In North Dakota, it's the PSC. And they care very much about rates and making sure there's not a negative impact on other consumers as a result of a large load. Whether the large load is us, data center, or an ethanol plant, or a chip manufacturer, or anything, they want to make sure that the existing customers are not harmed by new customers coming in. We have a law we could talk about too that's been proposed by Representative Kent Rowe. It actually has a requirement in that law that costs cannot be shifted from the data center to other consumers. Consumer protection, that's a huge benefit. Be able to say, not only is there a state regulator who doesn't want it, and they're elected positions in South Dakota, a utility who doesn't want it, the RTO who doesn't want it. We don't want it either. I don't want the bad press and anything. But there's then a state law that says, hey, you can't shift these costs from one ratepayer to another. I think that's a huge benefit. And then, for us, we don't want it either. I've got to go, be in these towns. We've got a couple hundred employees, at a facility like what's proposed in Toronto, South Dakota. We've got 300 and some odd, employees in Ellendale. Their kids go to school with the other kids. They have to see people at the Cenex, at the C-store, at grocery store, all these places. If everybody thinks that, and in fact rates did go up because of data centers, then they're not going to have a really good experience just moving around town, and that's really bad for us for retention. So we also want to make sure that everybody's being treated fairly, and we pay our fair share. We have to pay a lot of costs up front to make sure that there's no risk to consumers. So sorry, that was a lot. I just got on my pedestal there.
Nope, you're good. That's what we're looking for, is information. So appreciate it. So when you're looking at moving these into a community, and we talk about North Dakota, and I've heard this thrown out here and there as well, and get asked in the newsroom, if you will. But you have crews that are going to come along. You've got people that this is what they do for a living. So this is going to be stereotypical for a moment, but it's the worst case scenario, but another probably rumor mill situation. But you hear of we got construction crews coming to the community. Is it rough and tough guys, or is it like the oil crews? Sometimes you have a rough and tough oil crew moves to town, and that's what comes into your community, and that can make some people anxious. Yeah. You hear about any of that with data centers as well, or what?
So not with data centers. I spend a lot of time in communities chatting with people. My team, external affairs, this is what we do. Like we go, we'll go to the local gas station and have coffee with folks and have a chat. We'll do town halls. People do bring this up. We talked about water. We talked about the power rates. This is the next one. that people definitely bring up. And I know there were some challenges in the Bakken, back, 2010, 8, 9, 10, some kind of range. I don't hear about those challenges out there really anymore. That's really stabilized. What concerns me is, I have had very good experiences with contractors all over the place, whether they're electricians, plumbers, pipe fitters, carpenters, electricians, all of these things. I don't see these problems. I don't hear about these problems legitimately happening. Sure, there might be one person out of, in Ellendale, we've got 1,500 people or so on site. If there's a challenge with a person, that could happen, certainly. But I don't think that the contractors that are floating around South Dakota are a bunch of, drug addicted criminals who are doing all these terrible things. And by and large, we try to hire South Dakotans to do these jobs. And I have a healthy respect for the trades. I think they're hard workers. They're doing the work that we need as a country. There's a lot of things, become digital and are producing, things you can't see and touch, but we need electricians, we need plumbers, we need carpenters, we need all of these jobs. And these are the jobs that we hire for. And they're hard jobs, especially if it's, minus 20 out or minus 10 out in the winter. We work year round. And these are guys who are putting in, 8 to 12-hour days. At the end of the day, they want to go home. Maybe they want to go grab a beer with their buddies or have some dinner at a restaurant and do things like that. But no, we are not seeing these problems anywhere with these folks. In fact, it's funny because I mentioned we do town halls, and we like to do them fairly regularly at the beginning of a project. It could be more often than once every 3 months, but eventually we kind of get into once every third month. We'll kind of do these things. And I remember my first real follow-up one up in Ellendale, the emergency service manager stands up and he goes, "I want to talk about your contractors." And I'm like, oh, because I don't know, I show up at these things and you never know what people are going to say. And this guy, his name is Charlie up there. And I've gotten to know him a lot since then. But he goes, "I don't know what you do to your contractors, but they are the nicest, most well-behaved folks. Like, they're not getting in fights at the bar. It's no, sir, yes, ma'am, no, ma'am." Like, they're very polite. And I think that's just the Midwest, Steve. Like, certainly there's some folks out there who might be jerks, but by and large, they're not. Like, we've just had an excellent experience. We hire, we have contractors on the Ellendale site from 10 states. They're mostly Midwest. I mean, can you imagine bringing somebody from South Carolina or something to the winter in Ellendale? Probably not going to last, right? We want to get Iowa, Nebraska, South Dakota, Minnesota, Wyoming. Like, these are the places where these folks, are used to working that are likely to come. And they have been just the nicest folks. And we don't have these types of challenges. Do we have challenges with stop signs? Absolutely. We've got a big stop sign problem. We've tried very, very hard to do turn lanes and other things. And we talk about safety in all of our meetings constantly, both on-site and off-site. But crime, no, we don't have those reports. And, the sheriff in Ellendale has been excellent. The sheriff in Cass County near Fargo has been excellent. Stutzman County, we've been done with construction for a while, so not much going on there. But we just are not seeing these challenges.
All right. Well, the other thing I suppose people are really going to want to wonder is some kind of economic impact. So the two questions are probably, what's in it for us and what's in it for you? How does it work out for the community in the long term, and what's in it for you to come to a place like South Dakota?
Yep. So I'll talk about us first, just briefly, because people always want to know, like, what's in it? Why are these guys showing up? So we look for locations that have electricity, have adequate capacity to be able to run a facility like what we're running. And so we were attracted to Ellendale for that reason. We're attracted to Toronto for the same reason. So it's our industry needs to turn on one data center per week. It doesn't mean it takes a week to turn it on, but just from a demand perspective for consumers, our industry needs to turn on one data center every week. So we're all looking for places to turn on a facility, right? So that's number one for us. Number two, I mentioned it's cold. it saves us a lot of money to operate in the cold versus somewhere where it's hot. We published a white paper. Folks can go read it if it's interesting to them. But we save $50 million per year per 100 megawatts of computers. And for the dual county facility, we've got 300 megawatts of computers proposed at that location. So it's a lot of money to be able to save. Now, it doesn't mean we just get to keep that, right? We have to give an incentive to our customers. There needs to be adequate pricing to attract them to, to come to a location that's frankly harder to get to and from. That employment's a little bit harder, we have to train a lot of people. There's things like that. But that's a huge benefit for us to be in there is there is electricity, and that cold really helps with the operations of the facility. Now, what's in it for the community is a very straightforward answer. If you look at a quarter of land in Dual County, for example, the prior landowner or the current landowner, because we haven't closed on the land yet, but the current landowner pays something like $3,000 or $4,000 or $5,000 a year in property tax for that 160 acres. If you look at what we would pay, and we've had a lot of conversations with the director of equalization for Dual County, we would pay several $1 million per year in property tax for that same parcel of land. Their estimate is somewhere between $4 and $5.5 million per year for that single parcel. And for that site, we have 200 employees, is our projected number. That's a conservative number. It might be 250, but 200 certainly. Those folks are going to be mostly driving passenger vehicles to and from work, so there's not a lot of wear and tear on the roads. They'll have some kids, but hopefully we'll hire a lot of locals if we can. In Ellendale, we've managed to hire about 50%, a little more than 50% of our people from within 75 miles of Ellendale. And so we're not taking people far away, importing them. Some, move into the location, but typically, again, from the colder states, not always, but typically. And so that's just extra property tax for the county, which is a huge deal. If there's any way, there's a lot of talk about property tax reduction for South Dakotans in South Dakota. I've heard about a lot of plans. I haven't heard of one that makes any more sense than just bring in somebody who's willing to pay a lot of property tax on a small piece of land. We're willing to pay a lot of property tax on a small piece of land, and we're not coming in and saying, hey, give us a deal. Give us a pilot program, which is a payment in lieu of taxes. Give us, a discount. We're not asking for any of that. We're willing to pay those taxes. We might work with the county on some programs or something maybe, but we're eligible in North Dakota. We just haven't even asked. We just pay the property tax. So property tax is a huge deal. And by the way, Dual County, South Dakota has about $1 billion of total property taxable value in the county. We're talking about being 300 to 400 million, right? So 30-40% increase in property taxable value in a county. The commissioners, whether they do it or not, if it's feasible or not, the commissioners have told me, and they've said publicly, that part of their plan with those extra dollars that would be coming in is to give property tax relief to other people in Dual County. What a deal. The school district gets about half of that. It's a little more. I think it's either 53 or 58%. I forget which county is which, but more than half of the property tax dollars goes right to the school district. The other thing is sales tax on energy. South Dakota charges sales tax on energy. And we expect to pay a little bit more than $10 million a year in sales tax on the electricity we would use. And then the other benefit is that the electrical infrastructure we would have to pay up front, again, to do some improvements. The utility tells us they expect to pay about $3.5 million in centrally assessed taxes, to the state. So if you just add all that up, and I'll give it a range, but somewhere between $17.5 and $19 million a year from one single project is paid every year going forward. That doesn't include sales tax in the first year and a half to 2 years, which I expect to be somewhere around $18-19 million. It doesn't include the excise tax on construction, which is some extra dollars, inside of there. It doesn't include, the contractors eating at restaurants or staying at hotels, which means extra money in the community and taxes that are associated with that, or any of that other stuff. Just directly paid by our project and our organization, $17.5 to $19 million a year, and $19-ish million year 1 to 2. but there's other things, because every economic impact study always talks about the other stuff, but our direct paid numbers are so huge that I just talk about those. And then a couple hundred jobs, which I think is a great number in Dual County. It's not 2 or 3 or 5,000 people going to a factory every day. That would be a much bigger impact. It's a couple hundred people. So I think there's more benefits than that, but those are the simplest, easiest to kind of just lay out there.
Okay. And for some that say, they don't use AI, they don't want to use AI, and that is generally what is associated with a data center. But after a little bit more research, I kind of was surprised to find out what all actually runs through a lot of those processing centers. Could you maybe mention a few? I don't know if it's unique, but I even saw like a old rotary phone system. The phone system basically still runs through there. Some of those things, could you touch on? What uses it?
Yeah, so data centers, touch everything really at this point. You've got your car. Your car has a map on it, maybe it doesn't, but if it's got a map or sensors, or if you've got a phone that can see your car, there's that. Your online banking, if you watch Hulu, if you watch the TV, anything really you do is touching a data center. I did hear that the other day. Someone's like, well, if you don't like data centers, just go get a rotary phone. I'm like, nope. Even, any phone you pick up, the landline is still going to hit a data center. We do, in fact, build AI factories. They are for AI specifically. That's what we build. But no, data centers touch every facet of our lives. And here's the thing about AI. If you use Google, you're using AI. If you use, just cruising on the internet, if you're on Facebook, you're on social media, there's AI tools in there that are helping provide you content that's relevant to you. There's AI really in everything. And what's really blows my mind is if you go back to the beginning of Google, right? Beginning of Google, there was 0 searches per day. It took them 11 years to go from 0 searches per day to 1 billion a day. ChatGPT, which is probably the most popular AI tool out there, took 2.5 years to go from 0 queries per day to 1 billion a day. 2.5 years. It's here, it's adopted. Now, here's the other thing. Let's say nobody in Dual County, let's say nobody in South Dakota uses AI at all. That's not reality. People are using it every single day, but pretend they don't. The data centers serve everywhere from anywhere, right? So we're able to build a facility somewhere and serve anywhere. So if you decided, we build in South Dakota gets those benefits we talked about, the property tax, the high paying jobs, things like that. If it's not built in South Dakota, you don't. But AI still exists either way, right? It's out there. People are building these facilities all over the world. And if we want to stay, dominant as a country, we need these things built here. We don't need China. We don't need Russia. We don't need other countries, taking the lead in AI. That's not good for us from a business perspective, from an economic perspective, national security, you name it. We should be building these here in the United States. And if we're going to build them in the United States, what better place to build them than South Dakota? It's a net exporter of energy. It's cold climate that we like. We found a lot of great South Dakotans. There's South Dakotans doing these jobs right now today. Most of our workers are electrical workers, mechanical, plumbers, carpenters, facilities maintenance, snow removal, all the stuff you see all over the state. There's a small number of high-tech jobs. We have to train folks on those. But by and large, these are jobs South Dakotans are doing. So why not get the benefit for the thing that's going to exist either way, right? And I think it's a great deal. In terms of AI, people get worried about AI. I heard, somebody told me that they were at a meeting and someone said, well, I lost my job due to AI. I don't think so. Not yet. There might be some jobs that go away. But, same thing for, people with carriages and horses, right? Like that's changed. Like most of us have cars now. There's a lot less carriages and horses out there. Technology changes. AI is a tool. It's just a tool. It helps me write letters. I don't have to write near as many letters now. It takes me like 10 minutes to write a letter where it could take me days, before to kind of get the wording right. But medical has been huge. Farming has been huge for AI. Oil and gas has been huge for AI. On the medical one, my wife had a little skin cancer on her hand. And, she got a little biopsy of that, gave us back this, 30-page report. She took that, uploaded it to ChatGPT and said, what does all this mean? ChatGPT gave her a list of questions to ask her doctor. So you've been to the doctor, you go in, they got 5 minutes with you, and then they're out of there. ChatGPT gave her a list of questions to ask the doctor. She got out of there with a cream. Doctor started out, we're doing a surgery, we're going to cut this out, we're going to do all these things. She got out of there with a cream, cancer's gone. But had she not known what questions to ask and conversations to have, she was able to say to the doctor, hey, I think we should try it. Like, what is this and what that? They're like, oh yeah, maybe. And eventually they gave her a cream and she got out of there without a surgery. That's huge. Oil and gas, they're improving production, delivery of oil and gas. That's good for fuel prices. And then on farming, if you haven't heard of it, Grand Farm up near Fargo, it's out to the west of Fargo, has a bunch of test stuff going on. And they've got imagery, they've got soil analysis, they've got all these things where you could look at systems and say to a farmer, hey, irrigate here better, fertilize there differently, plant these seeds instead of those seeds, and they're getting better crop yields out of it. And the thing is anybody who doesn't figure out, hey, I should use these tools is just going to get behind. I mean, a family used to be able to make a living off of a single quarter of land. You can make a living. You and your family could make a living off of that. That is not the case anymore. You're out there with one of those manual mowers, cutting down your wheat, swinging it around, those, big round scythes or whatever they're called. If you're still doing that for farming, you're not doing so great as a farmer. You're not paying your bills, right? Technology has changed. This is just an extra tool for us to utilize.
So it kind of seems like you're in a situation whether it's kind of you take advantage of the opportunity or not, really. So you're looking at the South Dakota, North Dakota area. So I guess it's up to the state if they want to take you up on the offer, kind of is what it sounds like.
Yeah. So yeah, exactly. So in South Dakota is one of only 2 Midwest states that charges sales tax on the data center computers and equipment that's in there. Right now, because that's the law, we can't build one of these facilities in South Dakota. So there's a proposed law. Representative Kent Rowe has brought that forward. I spent the past year or so spending a lot of time with him and others. We traveled all over the state. I've been to the Dual County Commission 3 or 4 times. First one was just an intro. Then there was an interrogation for like an hour and a half by some local folks who came, which was great. Like, they had a lot of questions like what we talked about today. And I think that dialogue is the most important thing. And then I've been another time that was recorded and put online. And then we also did a tour around the state. We did a couple of events in Sioux Falls, Watertown, and Rapid City, answering questions for folks. And out of that came these types of questions. And so now there's protections for consumers inside of the proposed law. And the proposed law would allow us to not pay sales tax on just the data center equipment. There's other things, the buildings, the bricks and sticks, that we still have to pay sales tax on, just like everybody else. But it levels the playing field versus the other states in the country. And there's 42 states in the country that don't charge the sales tax or have some sort of incentive, on sales tax to attract us to come. And it just levels the playing field. South Dakota and Colorado are the only 2 Midwestern states that don't have this, that do charge sales tax on data center equipment. They're also the only 2 states in the Midwest that don't have these multi-billion-dollar data centers with the great paying jobs and property taxes and everything else that comes along with it.
All right. Wow. Well, I think that's all I had for questions for you. So I want to make sure, though, before we wrap up, I give you a moment if you've got anything else that you want to cover before we wrap up. And then when we do upload this too, we'll make sure for anybody listening that we'll get any information that Nick sends us and their links as well. And then your local representative, so you can ask them questions or whatever you need to do there. But yeah, Nick, is there anything that you do have too that you want to kind of wrap up with, if you will?
Yeah, I think it's just important to spend the time. It may sound scary, it may sound complex, but if you spend the time to look at it, I don't see any better economic development opportunity for the state of South Dakota right now than bringing folks in that are very compatible from a workforce standpoint, a very small land usage, very low water usage, a kind of perspective. And there may be an added benefit of rates going down for consumers. Whether that happens or not, I don't know, but I do know that they don't go up. And so seems like just a great opportunity. If South Dakota chooses to not embrace the opportunity, that's fine. We'll build these. We can continue to build them in North Dakota, Iowa, Nebraska, Minnesota, other places. But South Dakota Energy is already powering these facilities in other locations. So why not bring home the benefits of having these facilities right in the state?
All right. Well, District 4 is kind of where they're looking at building right now. So we'll make sure the information's out there for you. And Applied Digital, your website, is that, Nick, probably the best place you think most of your information is if they are looking to get a little more education?
Yeah, applieddigital.com has some, but that's mostly, outward world facing. I would say the best way to do things with us is come to a town hall. We have in-person meetings. You ask me questions directly. I'll be there. I do a lot of these things. We try to make them convenient, for especially people who are nearby. So feel free to reach out. They can email us, community@applieddigital.com. Just ask to join our newsletter, and that way they can get those announcements. Let us know that they're in South Dakota, and we can make sure that they get invited. But that's a great way to do it. Social media, LinkedIn is out there. We've got some social media posts on Facebook, of course, and things like that. But just come to some of our events. See for yourself. Ask questions. Make sure though that it's based on reality. There's a lot of things out there, unfortunately, that are based on other experiences. That's not what we're up to. So.
All right. Well, we appreciate you taking a moment, time out of your day to try to educate us on what we've got going on in our community and kind of right in our back door here. And we'll make sure we get that information out to as many as we can. And maybe we can connect with you a little bit closer to another town meeting and to let people know about that as well. So we appreciate that.
Yeah, we should have one coming up in February. I don't remember the exact date, but I think it's that 3rd or 4th week of February. So happy to connect, have you down. You could probably broadcast from there even.
Awesome. Cool. All right. Well, there you have it, folks. That's Nick with Applied Digital. Thanks again, Nick, for joining us. And we look forward to the next time. And we appreciate everything that they're looking at doing, whether it works out or not. That's up to you guys and maybe the state. So, Doreen, why don't you go ahead and we'll let you get back to some music here because we took up a little bit of that party time for this. So that'll do it for Northeast Radio SD's live stream and live interview with Applied Digital.